In a time where everyone is staying home and avoiding travel, it's not surprising to see airline and hotel companies post massive losses. This was the same case with Airbus at the start of the pandemic. We saw quarterly losses ranging between $500 million and $1.5 billion. Right off the bat, these losses were much less than their main competitor, Boeing, who was burning $3 to $4 billion every quarter. What's even more surprising though is that Airbus was not only able to reduce their losses, but even become profitable in the last quarter of 2020, pulling in $1.7 billion. Meanwhile, Boeing just posted their worst quarter in 15 years, losing $8.4 billion in a single quarter. So, how did Airbus recover so quickly from the pandemic, unlike Boeing? One of the key advantages Airbus has over Boeing is the Airbus A320. The Airbus A320 versus the Boeing 737 has been one of the closest battles over the past few decades. As of November 2019, total orders of all Boeing 737 models reached 15,136 aircrafts, while total orders of all A320 models stood at 15,193 aircrafts. The A320 did slightly have the lead over the Boeing 737, but you wouldn't quite say that either company was really winning until you considered one crucial factor. The first Boeing 737 flew in April of 1967, while the first Airbus A320 didn't fly till February of 1987. This means that Airbus was able to catch up to Boeing despite their 20-year head start. So, it's no question that A320s have been selling extremely well, and this has really helped Airbus recover during the pandemic. As airline travel starts up again, the first routes that are making a return are of course domestic routes. Traveling internationally has more bars and risks today than ever before, so people as well as businesses are choosing to stick to domestic travel as much as possible. Additionally, many airlines are choosing to use narrow-body jets even on medium to long-haul routes as well. When demand for these longer routes is less than half of their usual levels, it makes no sense to continue burning money on larger jets. This shift in demand has led to narrow-body airplane demand performing much better than wide-body airplane demand. And, as we previously discussed, within the narrow-body airplane market, it does seem like airlines prefer the A320 over the 737. This advantage for Airbus has only been accelerated forward by Boeing's blunder with the 737 MAX. After two fatal 737 MAX accidents in 2019, the Boeing 737 MAX was grounded around the world for nearly 2 years. In December of 2020, the FAA did approve the 737 MAX for flight, but it's going to take Boeing quite a while to become competitive against the A320 once again. Many airline passengers were spooked by the 737 MAX incident, and they aren't willing to fly in a 737 MAX until they've seen years of reliability in the market. Given that airline passengers are then customers of aircrafts, we'll likely see airlines approach the 737 MAX with caution, which just further helps the A320. Aside from a massive advantage in the narrow-body airplane market, Airbus happened to use the perfect time to stop A380 production. The A380 was a super ambitious double-decker plane meant to compete against the Boeing 747. The large interior space allowed for super luxurious business and first-class cabins, and even the economy seating was some of the best out there. The A380 also had no major safety or reliability errors despite its massive size. Pilots loved it, passengers loved it, and engineers loved it. Most airlines, however, did not love it. The problem with the A380 was simply that it didn't make economical or logistical sense for airlines. Most airports could not handle the A380, and new jetways and terminals had to be built specifically for the aircraft. Also, most routes did not need that much passenger capacity to begin with. For the routes that could support that many passengers, it often made more sense to split the passengers into two smaller aircrafts. This way, passengers had more options in terms of departure time, and airlines could more easily scale up or scale down with the demand. Not to mention, airlines could save significant amounts of money by flying two smaller aircrafts that were more fuel efficient. So, though the A380 was an engineering masterpiece and a passenger favorite, demand for the aircraft was not as much as Airbus initially anticipated. Fortunately for Airbus though, they decided to stop production at precisely the right time. In February of 2019, Airbus announced that they would stop production of the A380. Though this was a sad event, this allowed Airbus to smoothly scale out of production throughout the pandemic. At the time of the announcement, Airbus only had 17 A380 orders left. 3 were going to All Nippon Airways, and the rest were going to Emirates. As of December 2020, Airbus finished delivering all 3 A380s to All Nippon Airways, and they just have 5 more to deliver to Emirates. Meanwhile, Boeing 747 orders have been dwindling as well for the same reasons. Since 2016, 747 production has slowed to just 6 units per day, and Boeing has lost an average of $40 million on each unit. At that rate, Boeing was losing about $250 million every year by just keeping the 747 around. Despite this, Boeing refused to halt 747 production until after the pandemic began and the company was significantly in the red. So, at this point, Airbus had played the narrow-body and the super jumbo jet categories better than Boeing. The only category left is wide-body jets, and in this market, the Boeing 787 Dreamliner is no doubt the airline favorite. The 787 is by far the most fuel-efficient plane on the market. Not only does the 787 save on fuel costs, but it is generally quite a bit cheaper than its A350 counterparts. Take the 787-10 and the A350-1000 for instance. The 787-10 costs $325.8 million, while the A350-1000 costs $366.5 million. This means that airlines can save $40 million by opting for the 787 over the A350, and that's not even taking into account bulk order discounts, which will likely only make the disparity even larger. This disparity is super clear when you take a look at orders for either aircraft. As of August 2019, Boeing had a total of 1,464 787 orders, out of which 882 had already been delivered. Airbus, on the other hand, only had a total of 913 A350 orders, out of which only 300 were delivered. Clearly, this was a category that Airbus was significantly lagging behind in, but ironically, this worked out perfectly for Airbus. As we previously discussed, international travel demand has fallen off a cliff since the start of the pandemic, and this is where 787s, 777s, and A350s are primarily used. Given that 737 MAXs were grounded, 777s and 787s were crucial to Boeing's business. But unfortunately, the wide-body market was severely impacted by the pandemic. And as for Airbus, given that customers far prefer the 787, Airbus was never that dependent on the A350 to begin with. So, in terms of the passenger airline business, Airbus was simply at the right place at the right time, and Boeing was not. Boeing couldn't have chosen a worse time to fail with a narrow-body jet, and Airbus couldn't have chosen a better time to step away from super jumbo jets. Couple this with a smaller dependency on the wide-body market, and it's not hard to see why Airbus weathered the downturn quite well. But all of that is just what's apparent on the surface. Those points are absolutely valid and played a large role in either company's outcome. However, there are many more factors that influence the outcome from the background, such as poor leadership. Over the past 20 years, Boeing's leadership has become more and more focused on their stock price as opposed to their core business. This has led them to focus on numbers and statistics instead of meeting the needs of their customers. For instance, there have been countless stories online about how leadership at Boeing pressured employees to rush through training and rush through safety checks and rush through problems in general. This was in an effort to push out as many aircrafts as possible and bolster their stock price as much as they could. Over the short term, the detriments of this flawed approach aren't visible, but with time, we'll see bigger and bigger mistakes, and the 737 MAX was simply one example of that. If Boeing's leadership wasn't so short-sighted, they likely would have caught the issues with the 737 MAX during inspection, and they wouldn't have had to deal with such a massive fiasco. As for Airbus's leadership, they're not perfect by any means either. At the end of 2019, Airbus had just gone through a 3-year bribery investigation, and Airbus would end up settling with a $4 billion fine. Fun fact, this was actually the largest bribery settlement amount in history. So clearly, Airbus is by no means a saint, but over the past 20 years, their leadership hasn't been nearly as focused on share price as Boeing has. This is likely because Airbus isn't as mature of a company as Boeing. Even today, Airbus is worth about $98 billion, and Boeing is worth $145 billion. So, Airbus has historically had more room to grow within their core business itself. Meanwhile, Boeing has had to get more creative to continue indefinite stock growth. Something else to consider is that Boeing's space, defense, and securities business is much larger than that of Airbus. Boeing's space, defense, and securities business generates about $26 billion every year, while Airbus's space and defense business only generates $10 billion per year. So, Airbus is likely more focused than Boeing on their commercial customers, as they have less diversification. Anyways, in the end, the main reasons Airbus was able to recover so quickly from the pandemic is that their leadership has been more focused on their customers than Boeing, and their position within the market simply held up better than that of Boeing. Why do you guys think Airbus was able to turn around so fast? Comment that down below. Also, drop a like if you guys thought this video explained the situations of either company well. And of course, consider joining our Discord community to suggest future video ideas, and consider subscribing to see more questions logically answered. But until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.